On this edition of Independent Sources, Stop and Frisk. The city's LGBT community joins the growing chorus of voices speaking out against the police department's controversial policy.
Immigrants and the economy. A new study finds that immigrant women are more likely to be business owners compared to their U.S.-born counterparts.
And shots on goal. How one local organization is helping high school students through soccer. Welcome to Independent Sources. I'm Abby Ashola.
And I'm Gary Pierre-Pierre. New York's lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community are joining the growing horde of voices speaking out against the New York City Police Department's Stop and Frisk policy. Several LGBT groups recently lent their support to the NAACP, the National Action Network, and Union 1199 SEIU, United Healthcare Workers East, as a march and protest of the issue.
The march came only a few days after several members of the transgender community in Jackson Heights, Queens, claimed that the NYPD was unfairly targeting them as prostitutes because of their ethnicity.
Tonight, we'll talk to Marjorie Hill of Gay Men's Health Crisis about why Stop and Frisk has become an issue for the gay community.
Before that, we'll take in some scenes and sounds from the recent march that led thousands from Harlem to 79th Street in Manhattan.
I'm here for the same reason that tens of thousands of people are walking down Fifth Avenue in a silent but powerful march. We want an end to Stop and Frisk.
I'm here in solidarity with all the families that their kids have been murdered by police.
Here to protect the future of my son.
This is not only about Stop and Frisk. Recent surveillance of Muslims and Muslim students across the U.S. has reached a level that's simply unacceptable.
It's creating deep divisions between the community and the police, and that's not good for anybody.
Racial profiling is something we've lived with all our lives, but it's getting a little out of hand. Police over here, they act more like zookeepers than actually guardians, you know?
They're not even looking at the people, they're just saying, you're black, I take you. You're Puerto Rican, I'll take you.
It's been going on for years. All these cops over here? It needs to stop.
It's racial profiling, and it's got no place in our city or our country.
And we will not be silent. Racist cops are violent. And we will not be silent. Racist cops are violent. And we will not be silent. Racist cops are violent. And we will not be silent.
Marjorie, last week the NYPD issued new directives to the patrol officers, basically telling them that some of the practices that they were doing can no longer be applied. For instance, they can no longer, make derogatory comments towards transgenders. They can no longer search for sexual identity by frisking them, mostly as a result of your and other groups' activism. Do you think they go far enough, these measures?
Well, the challenges around Stop and Frisk really have to do with racial profiling, identity profiling, and harassment. And so harassment does not make our society safer. And I think the change in guidelines is a recognition that in many cases the police go too far.
Well, why are they targeting the transgender and the gay community? What is it about that particular group that cops feel that it's okay to attack?
I could say, why are they targeting people of color?
Certainly. That's sort of like it's been part of the discussion all along. We've known that. We write about that. We report on that, and we discuss that a lot more.
And large numbers of the transgender population in New York City are people of color.
Okay.
As are many of the young kids who are also stopped are people of color. There's also an ordinance that if in fact an individual has even one condom in their possession, the police can take the person in for suspicion of prostitution. we encourage young people and not so young people to have lots of condoms. And so it's really contrary to public health statute, in fact, or belief that New York City endorses, because we give out New York City condoms.
Where should it go beyond this? What are you guys calling for? What should be done? I mean, beyond these directives that were issued last week?
Well, you know, directives are important, but training is more than just having a rule. I mean, we don't give surgeons a book and say, okay, here's the rule, go do brain surgery. We really have them supervised, mentored, and encouraged to do the right thing. So while it is a move in the right direction, it's going to take a little bit more than just, you know, a little bit of guidelines.
I read somewhere that statistics for stop and frisk had increased like 1,000% over the last 10 years or so.
Well, you know, before he became mayor, then Borough President Dinkins had a protest at One Police Plaza. I think it was 1989. And he and Basil Patterson had a civil action, and they were outraged because there had been 80,000 stop and frisk that year. We are up to about close to 600,000, and for a trajectory of 800,000 by the end of the year. And in terms of when you look at the numbers of weapons that are recovered, it doesn't really match up. So, I mean, the policies have not really yielded in the way in which it's being suggested. In all fairness, does there need to be some type of investigation around the amount of weapons we have on the street? Yes, but you know, they get more guns from the, I think it's a $100 thing where you just bring your gun, no questions. They collect more guns from those types of interventions than they do from stop and frisk.
You talked about training. Are you willing to sit down and help the NYPD craft some training guidelines?
Well, actually, I've already done that.
Okay.
When I worked for Mayor Dinkins as director of the Mayor's Office for the Lesbian and Gay Community, we helped write the curriculum that continues to be taught in the police academy. But these are not necessarily cadets. In the same way that people have continuing education, well, sometimes it might be helpful for some officers to have continuing education in cultural sensitivity, which is not to say that people are bad people, but we live in one of the most diverse communities in the country. To understand the nuances, the way in which body movements, how people approach authority are good. It's good policing.
Are there any transgender police officers?
I think you should ask the police commissioner that.
Well, because here's the thing. I remember 10, 20 years ago, there were a lot of issues with different ethnic groups not being well represented in the NYPD. And the agency underwent a tremendous recruiting effort. And right now, it's done quite a bit in that sense. So is this something that you'll be asking? Is this something that you'd like to see?
Well, I think that the New York City Police Department should in fact reflect New York's diverse populations. And lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender officers, if they can in fact uphold their responsibilities, it's good for the city. It's interesting when we talk about diversity. I think the Vulcans, the firefighters, African-American firefighters, just won a lawsuit because, in fact, there had not been sufficient diversity in their recruitment efforts. So, I mean, we still have a lot of challenges around diversity, even in New York.
Well, definitely, it's a challenge. But tell me, the training that you helped create for the cadets, what are some of the things that you did?
So you want me to go back 20 years?
Certainly.
I think that part of it is about recognizing that LGBT people are part of a community. They live in families. that there are some biases, as all biases, in fact, come from ignorance. I mean, there are biased opinions about Latinos and about African Americans and about women, and it comes from ignorance and lack of information. So this lesson really talked about the culture and the and some of the information about...
What are some of the things that I think an officer should know about a transgender or bisexual person?
Well, I mean, I think, first of all, that this is going to sound like really basic, but in the same way as all people are to be respected, all people are to be treated fairly, and whether or not I live that particular lifestyle or that's my identity, that there's certain people that person should be treated with respect. And sometimes when we are unfamiliar, that breeds the kind of insensitivity. So police officers should know that, lesbians are parents, and that gay people go to church, and trans people pay taxes, that and that they need protection from violent criminals just like everyone else, and that in the range of society that these are individuals who, again, as citizens, as individuals, deserve the protection of the law, not harassment.
One last question. Do you think there has been enough outrage at this issue of stop and frisk in the city?
I was out at the march last Sunday, and it was really impressive to see and to feel the diversity and the power of the varying voices from the varying communities. And so I think that the message is being heard loud and clear that New Yorkers who believe in justice, New Yorkers who are some from faith communities, New Yorkers, some from the business community and from the labor unions, you were reading my mind, as well as LGBT New Yorkers are saying, we're in the greatest city in the world. We need to act that way.
Unfortunately, we have to leave it there. Marjorie Hill, thanks for joining us.
You're welcome.
Still to come on Independent Sources, immigrants and their economic influence.
Before that, Zyphus LeBrun has some other news.
Thanks, Gary. Here's a look at some headlines from the ethnic media. From El Diario La Prensa, Mayor Michael Bloomberg is opening several new bilingual programs in order to increase graduation rates in the city's public schools. In the past, the Bloomberg administration has made several changes to English as a second language, or ESL programs, but none have proven to be successful. Researcher Kate Mencken of the Center for Language Studies at Queen's College says the problem stems from many school principals who feel the use of other languages to teach English has a poor effect on students' performances on standardized tests. The mayor is taking action again by opening 125 new bilingual programs, 15 to 18 transitional bilingual programs, and 25 dual language programs. The Department of Education is also starting a program to teach principals and teachers how to best use bilingual programs. From the Jewish Week, a recent study reveals proof of population growth and economic decline among Jews in New York. The UJA Federation finds that New York's Jewish community has grown nearly 10% since 2002. Of the 1.5 million Jews in the city, nearly 500,000 are Orthodox. 37% identify as just Jewish, suggesting they aren't deeply involved in the community. The study also finds that poverty has become prevalent among the group, with more than 500,000 Jews, about 1 in 4, living in poor or near poor Jewish households in New York City. Gary Rosenblatt of the Jewish Week says Jews need to rethink the definitions of Jewish community and the goals and strategies to those committed to serving it. The Amsterdam News reports that the National Black Theatre will remain open thanks to Manhattan Borough President Scott Stringer. The iconic Harlem Center almost went into foreclosure last year after facing several disputes with former business partners accused of mismanagement. The theater also had a dispute with a nearby restaurant. Stringer was able to get representatives from the theater to meet with Baltoro Capital Management. The real estate investment management firm then relieved the theater of over $10 million in debt. Baltoro Capital also promised that it would keep the theater in the building rent-free, even if the building is sold. And finally, doctors in Italy recently performed a life-saving surgery after implanting the world's smallest artificial heart into a 16-month-old baby boy. The unidentified baby, who suffered from a heart muscle disease, was kept alive for 13 days through the procedure before receiving a transplant. The Italian Tribune reports that the tiny titanium pump weighs less than an ounce and can handle blood flow of 50 fluid ounces a minute. Artificial hearts for adults weigh 2 pounds. The surgeon, Antonio Amodeo, called the procedure a milestone. Though the device is now used as a bridge leading to a transplant in the future, it could be permanent. Those are just a few headlines from the ethnic media. Back to Abby and Gary.
Thanks, Zyphus. A new study from the Fiscal Policy Institute finds that more immigrants than ever are now business owners in the U.S. The report shows that immigrant-owned small businesses employ nearly 5 million people. That's about 14% of the total number of people in the country employed by small businesses with less than 100 workers.
The report also found that immigrant women were leading the charge in closing the gender gap in business ownership. David Dysgard-Kallick, Senior Fellow and Director of FPI's Immigration Research Initiative, joined me in studio to talk about some of the report's other eye-opening findings. David, the Fiscal Policy Institute finds that immigrants own a significant amount of small businesses in the country, and that number has gone up over the past 20 years. Can you give us a little bit more on those numbers?
Sure. Well, so in 1990, immigrants owned about 12% of the businesses in the United States. And now, today, immigrants make up 18% of business owners in the country. So that's a pretty big increase, right? It's gone from an important number to really 1 in 6 of all of the business owners in the country are immigrants. And when we say immigrants, we mean people born in another country. So it's recent or people who have come in the first generation. So I think that's an important finding and an important reminder about just what a big role immigrants are playing in the economy in America.
What do you think has prompted that increase?
Well, I think it's largely, I think people are very aware that the number of immigrants has increased in the last 20 years, right? And so we've had a lot of immigrations to the country, and I think maybe people are a little bit less aware that in step with that has been an increase in the number of business owners. So, immigrants are not only coming and working as employees, they're also coming and working as employers.
So what exactly is the importance of small businesses to the U.S. economy?
About a third of employment in the U.S. economy is due to small businesses. So these are kind of individually owned businesses and average number of employees is between 10 and 20. So you're talking about relatively small businesses, and it's an important dynamic part of both the economy itself, as I say, about a third of employment. It's also an important part of our communities and neighborhoods, kind of what makes New York or America feel like. You can see I'm a New Yorker, but I think we see it, of course, especially in New York in neighborhoods. But what makes it feel like a neighborhood? The grocery stores, the restaurants, the dry cleaners, the gas stations also, and just kind of the local businesses.
So those are the sorts of jobs that they're providing.
Well, this is why I was thinking of that, is that what we see is that I think you hear a lot about immigrants as owners of technology businesses, kind of the high-tech sector, and that's true, and we see that as well. But about 20% of the firms in that sector are owned by immigrants. But you see it even more so in restaurants and hotels and in grocery stores and in the kind of downtown businesses that make Main Street lively areas, or in New York, the places that you've seen over and over again that are renovating and reviving different urban areas. So I think that it's true that high tech is an important sector for immigrants, but it's also, I would say, don't lose sight of the fact that the main stuff is happening on Main Street.
And the findings also find that immigrants don't typically have college degrees, the ones that own these small businesses. Is that surprising at all?
It surprised me just because, again, I feel like we hear so much about the highly educated immigrants who are going to be, good for the economy, and maybe we should have point system at the national level or something like that. In fact, the majority of business owners don't have a college degree, and I didn't realize this, but it shouldn't have surprised me because it's also true for U.S.-born workers. So, in fact, most small business owners, don't have a college degree, and that's true for immigrants, but it's also true for U.S.-born.
Also, women immigrants are leading the way with females who own businesses. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, that was interesting to see. So first of all, it's important to realize there's a pretty big gap. I think people do realize it, between men and women in terms of business ownership. So men are much more likely to own businesses than women, but that gap has been closing slowly over the last 20 years. And immigrant women are a little bit more likely than U.S.-born women to own businesses. So I think that was an interesting finding, and I'd be curious to go a little further to see what exactly lies behind that.
It would be. What's the ethnic breakup of immigrants who own businesses, small businesses?
Well, so in the United States as a whole, the top countries, Mexicans are the number one. Maybe that's not surprising because Mexicans are also the biggest immigrant group. On the other hand, I'm not sure we hear so much about Mexican immigrant business owners. Indians, Cubans, or I think Indians, Koreans, then Cubans. So you have a pretty big mix. In fact, it's actually a very diverse immigrant population in America, and also a very diverse group of immigrant business owners.
Do these groups own specific sorts of businesses that vary within each group?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think what you see is if you look at business ownership kind of across the board, immigrants and US-born business owners, immigrants at least are pretty well distributed across the spectrum. But if you then look at the individual immigrant groups, what you see is there are a lot of Polish people who own construction jobs, for example, construction businesses, or a lot of Mexicans in restaurants, or a lot of, so there are certainly some areas where each group is concentrated, but they're different groups. So each immigrant group kind of adds another layer to the picture, and when you look at the whole, it actually, for immigrants, looks not very different than for US-born.
So what do these numbers say about the political climate in the United States?
Well, I guess I would maybe put it the other way around.
For immigrants, at least.
Exactly. I mean, I think it's certainly a concern to me what the political climate is in terms of what's the effect going to be on immigrant businesses. I think that you see some of this happening in places like Arizona or Alabama, where they've been passing laws that seem to be not only the explicit intent of the laws is whatever it is, but then also there's this kind of climate that gets created of antagonism towards immigrants. And I think that among lots of other things people should be thinking about, one aspect is also what's the effect on the business climate. That if you're a business owner, if you're an immigrant business owner in particular, and you're thinking about opening a business or expanding your business in an area, you may think twice if it starts to feel like a place that's hostile to immigrants. And I do think that there is some real reason for concern about what would happen to the economy if we start to feel like a place that's not welcoming, or where we don't think that there's a place for immigrant businesses.
And how do these figures differ historically?
Well, over time they've been growing, and I think what we see is a kind of parallel growth between the immigrant population, the immigrant share of the US-born population, and the immigrant share of business owners. So the two things, I think, go together. So I think immigrants, I think we sometimes hear exaggeration in some ways on both sides. I think, one thing you sometimes hear is immigrants are kind of super entrepreneurs and I think that I think that what we see is immigrants are, in fact, a lot more like everybody else than we sometimes acknowledge. And immigrants are a little bit more likely to be business owners, but not a lot more likely to be business owners. It is certainly true that as you then go, as we were talking about before, into particular groups, that you may see, that people from the Middle East, for example, or from India, are particularly likely to be business owners. But I think on net, you see a little bit more likely.
Is that idea of the American dream something that's a contributing factor to this, you think?
I think certainly. I mean, I think, look, there are factors that go in both directions, right? I think that there are, on the one hand, just by nature of coming to the United States and sort of picking up your roots, moving your family, starting something new, shows a kind of entrepreneurship in itself, right? And so it's not very surprising. And of course, then you're also bringing new ideas. You may see something that you had in your home country that's lacking here, and you think, oh, I know how to get that and how to put it up. And especially if you live in a community where there may be other people from that same country, that they may be looking for the same hair products or the same foods or the same things, and so you start of services. So I think that that's in some ways all very natural and is part of the explanation for why immigrants may be more likely to be business owners. On the other side, there are some negative things as well, right? It may be harder to get a loan from a bank, for example, harder to navigate the starting of how do you incorporate and all that kind of thing. So I think that there are both sort of positive and negative factors, and as we see on net, it winds up being a little bit more, but not a lot more than US-born people.
Okay. Well, David, that's all the time we have. Thanks for being on.
All right. Thanks for having me.
You can read more about the report by visiting the website fiscalpolicy.org.
When we come back, high school students reaching their goals through soccer. Finally from us tonight. Over the last few weeks, many have caught the soccer sickness as they huddle in bars or sat at work sneaking a glance at the European Soccer Championships.
While the international stars are being hailed as maestros and magicians on the pitch in the Ukraine and Poland, a few local volunteers from the New York Soccer Project are doing their part to use the sport to help some of the city's high school students reach their own goals. Marlene Peralta tells us more.
The soccer is becoming more and more popular. In fact, there are more registered soccer players in the U.S. than in any other one sport.
This popularity drove Greg Pinell and his partner Santos Montaño to start the World Soccer Project in 2009, an international association based in New York City that not only runs adult soccer leagues, but also supports underserved schools, many of them located in immigrant communities.
We offer free after-school programs in the form of soccer leagues to New York City schools that can't afford to sponsor their own team in the public schools athletic league, or that don't have the human resources to do it either. And we are able to do so by providing adult soccer that people pay for. And so the registration fees for the adult soccer effectively acts as a donation for the independent schools league that we run.
Greg was the one who really came up with the business plan and tied in the charitable aspect of the league. And I'd say I was the one that was more obsessed with soccer, as I am. And so I think my role in it was really to focus on making it the best possible soccer league.
Adult players volunteer in the school league, some of them as coaches, and others use their connections to find other ways to get funding.
One of our friends is a tattoo artist, Three Kings Tattoo. He also plays soccer with him, Alex McWatt. Knew somebody with City Sports. He got them involved, and next thing you know, we're having coffee and sitting down with City Sports and Adidas. And we were only asking for jerseys because some of our kids are literally have no money. And we were spending a lot of money out of our pockets. And as a result, City Sports and Adidas came back and fully funded the entire league.
The school league has 160 students from 8 different high schools playing soccer for free. The association's only challenge is finding space to play.
The market for soccer here is massive. The demand is there. The problem is park space is highly limited, and there are really 3 soccer organizations that hold the large majority of soccer permits. So for a new organization to come along, we started our leagues in 2010, and we were only able to get one slot a week for 2 hours only.
In the short term, I'd say one of our goals is to run more leagues, try to get more space and start as, maybe a few more leagues this coming year. I'd say in the long term, though, the idea would be to have this running in many cities across the United States, and ideally, in other parts of the world, too.
Aside from finding more space to score goals, Pinell is now looking forward to taking his soccer players to volunteer in Ecuador later this year to help build a school in a poor community. Marlene Peralta for Independent Sources.
That's our show this week. Thanks for staying tuned.
Till next time, be independent-minded.